Melanie McGhee, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you here. Your friend Betty Friedson, who is also my guest on episode number 741, insisted I should have you on the show. So that's how this has come about in part. But then you also let me know that you've been a Shrink Wrap Radio listener.
Yes, I have.
Really?
Yes, I enjoy it very much.
Well, that's great. Well, this is my chance to do a little market research then. Do you remember how you first learned about Shrink Wrap Radio?
I think that one of my students told me about it. Yeah, a couple of years ago. I'm pretty sure. I think one of my students told me about it.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I'm always interested to know how the word gets out.
Yeah.
What stands out for you about the show? This will be the last thing I ask you about the show.
I think that one of the things that I appreciate about the show is the wide range of guests that you have on.
Yeah.
And I also particularly appreciate the confluence of like the recent conversation you had with Scott Miller about his work in deliberate practice and then something as wide ranging as Betty's great work in intuition and accessing our intuition as healers and psychotherapists. So I appreciate the wide range of conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's definitely one of the things that I set out to do, actually, and have stuck with. And yet at the same time, it will fall into a pattern either by plan, but often just by synchronicity into a meaningful pattern of a little run, where they kind of relate to each other. And that's always very exciting to me when that happens, because as I say, it's usually not due to planning. So, but let's talk about you, as they say. And you refer to your approach as integration and acceptance therapy, or AIT. You really
acceptance and integration training.
What? Oh, did I say something? Acceptance and integration
training. Yeah, instead of therapy.
Yeah. Okay. So that's something I wanted to ask you about. Is it therapy or is it not therapy? Why or why not?
Yeah, it's definitely therapeutic and is being used by psychotherapists in numerous states. It's also being used by spiritual directors and coaches and mentors. The choice for the word training instead of therapy was very deliberate. Though I'm a psychotherapist and have been practicing since 1984.
Okay.
One of my main mentors, Dick Alney, he developed self-acceptance training. And from his point of view, self-acceptance is not a static state, it's dynamic. And we're always being informed and invited into deeper levels of acceptance. And so it's a lifelong experience rather than a one and done.
Yeah, that's a good point. So say more about how you came to develop this approach.
Well, it probably began when I was in graduate school, when I was leaving graduate school, and two of my professors at the time suggested that I really wanted to become more effective as a psychotherapist. If I wanted to master the work, I needed to find masters and study with them. So I took that to heart. And over the course of the years, I studied with incredible master therapists, Dick Alney, Bob and Mary Goulding, Corey Hammond. And then I guess probably close to 15 years ago now, I met Jivarad Slavinsky, who is a psychologist from Belgrade. And his work in integration really brought it all together for me. So
what was his first name? I didn't catch it.
Jivarad, Zivorad, Zivarad.
Okay.
Yeah, Slavinsky.
Okay. But you started to say more about him. I cut you off.
Oh, that's good. Jivarad, I had been studying non-dual philosophy and meditation for a few decades by the time I met him. And the work that I experienced with him brought alive teachings that I had been studying and gave a mechanism for psychological transformation that also lands in spiritual well-being. So the development of the model began just with the study with all these teachers. And then a friend of mine, another student of Shivarad's who is in Canada, Satyan Raja, Satyan suggested that what I was doing was more than the sum of the parts, and really encouraged me to contemplate the model so
Yeah.
that I could share it more. And
Wow.
that was really the beginning, was
Yeah.
recognizing that it is a model.
And what's your good friend is Betty, who we already referred to here. And what's the role of intuition in your approach? Because that's big for her, and I assume it might be for you as well.
Yeah, one of the things that we find is that intuition of psychotherapists, and again, we don't have the research on this, but when we are uncluttered from tangled and charged energy ourselves, and same with our clients, we have access to greater intuition. So instead of it's like one of the consequences of this work is increased experiences of mindfulness. Mindful awareness. It's not like we go at it directly, but it arises. Mm-hmm. And another consequence of the work is enhanced intuitive awareness that feels like there's very little doubt about it. It's just informed by your own inner knowing. And so when it arises, there's no doubt. It's just, wow, this is the next right step for me.
Yeah. Well, take us more deeply into it, like, what do you do?
Yeah. So the model, it has really 5 phases. And we first begin with seeking understanding like we would in any therapeutic approach. But we move through these 5 phases in every session. So in seeking understanding, we're engaging in a discovery process to discover what's most challenging for our client at the time, what they want to work on, what their change contract is for that session. That aspect of the work was really influenced by Bob and Mary Goulding and their brilliance with contracting for change. So the first probably 10 minutes or so is in discovery and seeking understanding about where our client is. We're also asking at that point what change they noticed from the previous work, because we want to make sure that the change that we work toward actually held. So there's nothing left that we need to address. So once we do that, then we move on to engaging our clarity and focus by collaborating on what is it exactly we're going to focus on. Now that we've kind of explored some things, we're narrowing our focus. Once we've done that, we move into resolving the problem, resolving the tension of the problem through integration. And that's really where the magic is. That we are accessing. I love what you said earlier, David, about that when things get on a run, because your recent conversation about DBT, it's like, yeah, there's definitely similarities with DBT. Okay. What we do, though, in the resolution of the problem part is that we are neutralizing the charged tension of thoughts, images, emotions, and body sensations.
I was going to say, this is starting to sound like there might be some kind of body work or attention on the body. Yeah. So keep going.
Definitely. Because, as human beings, from our perspective, we have 4 elements of experience: thoughts, images, emotions, and body sensations. And when those elements are charged, then we are limiting our perspective. So what we do in the resolution aspect of this, the integration part, is that we are neutralizing that charged energy. And what happens is that we and our clients experience a more spacious awareness, because we're no longer tangled in all this psycho-emotional tension. So there's empty, spacious awareness.
What do you do to neutralize the energy?
So there are a number of ways that we do that. That one of the principles of this work is that the integration of 2 opposing psychological states can alleviate psychological suffering. So, for instance, if we have someone who's really worried about sending their child to school right now, I mean, this is real. This is a
This
very
is
difficult time.
very big in our family with grandkids. It's a lot of discussion right now.
A lot of discussion.
Yeah.
And trying to discern what right action is very difficult. We don't have much space between the stimulus of the anxiety and the response of, oh, I've got to do something now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the things that we try to do is create a little more internal space so we can have a broader perspective. So for instance, with this worry, and we can think of worry as like a one, or, I don't worry very much, but people who journey with anxiety or depression and it's alive for them, that's a cognitive pattern for them, right? So with worry, for instance, I recently worked with someone, we look for two opposites to oscillate with. And with this one, we just oscillated between the thought that came up about worry and then what the emotion was, back to whatever thought there was, back to whatever new emotion there was. And moving like this, back and forth like this, eventually what happens, Dave, is that people no longer, there's like, I can't think of anything and I don't feel any emotion other than calm. And it happens relatively quickly. So that's a tiny little example, but we have, the certification process, for instance, they take 8 months to learn a lot of different ways to help people become more integrated and whole.
Yeah. Well, often in these interviews, I'm working from a book that the person has written and can develop a lot of questions around that. I don't have that at this point. You haven't written that book yet.
That's right.
I don't know if you're working on it. I'll bet you are. Yeah. So examples are really helpful to make it concrete for us. Mm-hmm. So please feel free to keep going and to make it as concrete. And, we want to be a fly on the wall and
right.
Hey, how is this like the things we already know? How is it different than the things we already, for example, when you're talking about the integration of opposites, I started to think of psychosynthesis, and I took a workshop at Esalen many years ago in psychosynthesis, and a lot of it was about bringing together the opposites and raising them up towards the light, if you will, and that there would be a coming together.
Yes. So Roberto Assagioli's work in psychosynthesis, his work is kind of threaded throughout Zivarad's work. You'll see the evidence of it, particularly the principle that in lower states of consciousness there are no solutions, and in higher states of consciousness there are no problems.
I like that as a phrase.
Isn't that nice? And so we're essentially working like, for instance, okay, if we're in the resolution part, the integration part of this, and I can think of a client who was very angry at his wife about something that she did, and he was not really regulating that emotion very well, and so he was coming across pretty aggressively, and it's not the kind of relationship that he wants to have. Yeah. So the problem was identified. I got angry unnecessarily. The goal was identified. I want to be more patient and able to listen better. So clear problem, clear goal. What we did was, with that particular situation, we oscillated in a very specific way, identifying the thoughts, images, and emotions and sensations associated with the anger in that moment, and found another moment of just a happy moment, unrelated to the situation. Any old happy moment in life, doesn't matter. Oscillating between those two, what happens is that the thoughts, images, emotions, and sensations on both sides disappear, and there's only emptiness left. Then when I ask him later, so we resolve the problem doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like he can listen with more ease. But then when I go on to the next step to verify the results, so what do you think? Is it possible that this anger at your wife could impose itself on you again in the future against your will? Yeah. So on a scale of 0 to 10, about how confident are you that this is under your control? About a 6. That's not great. We want him to be higher, at an 8 or a 9, that he can absolutely pull back from this anger. Okay. So now that we know he thinks it's going to be a problem for him in the future against his will, then we can work from the wife's point of view, and that will reveal more content. Ask him the question again. He says, no, it's not going to be a problem. So then he goes home and embodies what the new knowledge and understanding that he has. And the next time he comes back, we ask him again, so what happened with that anger situation? It's really not a problem. So that's how a session and the next session pretty much look.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a sense, you check in at the beginning of each session to kind of assess freshly. And so do you tend to find continuity, like as a person working on a theme or a set of issues over from session to session, or is it really like just hopping around from one state of being to another?
Yeah, I think okay. So what I notice with people who have been journeying with depression or anxiety for a long time, they're more in the theme of really looking at and learning to uproot distorting thinking and routines that don't serve them, whether they're patterns of thinking or patterns of being that don't serve them. So their work is pretty focused like that. With people who are not journeying with a mood disorder, it's really interesting, David, because they tend to forget, oh, I forgot that was a problem. Now I want to talk about that thing that happened at work. Or I want to, and I want to talk about this goal I have. And I was just reviewing some videos from my recent training with a fellowship. This is the certification program. And one of the people was talking about how she noticed that her clients in 6 months went from, having all kinds of relationship problems at work and at home and feeling really stressed and overwhelmed. And the pandemic was wearing them down and really working with sort of the stress that's coming at them. And then within 5 months, they're saying, no, really what I want to develop ongoing steadiness. I'm really ready to, like, their goals become higher. It's like they move up a hierarchy of goals very naturally.
I like the phrase that you use, journeying with depression, journeying with anxiety. It's I've not heard it said that way before, and yet it's very evocative, and it also seems to me to be better than, it's not quite labeling a person in the way that in the past
having a mood disorder.
Having this. So instead of you are suffering from this, it's you're journeying with this, which suggests that maybe you could depart from that thing that you've been journeying with, or set it down.
And it's also a reminder, one of the principles of this work is the true self is not encumbered by the limitations of a narrative. The true self is a being. So a big part of this work is helping people shift identification from the conditioning of their narrative and their trauma and their experiences to align with who they are as a being. And so for me, it's a journey. Some of us are journeying with trauma. Some of us are journeying with all kinds of things.
Yeah. One of the things I'm wondering about, because there's clearly a spiritual dimension to this, what's your own spiritual history, if I may ask? Did you grow up in a religious family? Blah, blah, blah.
It's such a good question. Sometimes I think I must have been just born for this. That my grandparents were Pentecostal holiness people.
Mine
my
too.
Grandfather. So my mother's response to all of that was, honey, I'll take you to any church you want to go to, but I am not going. So as a kid, and I was an army brat. So we moved all over the world. When we lived in the Middle East, I went to mosques. When we lived in the Southeast, I went to church, I went to temple. So I came up with kind of a wide open feeling and experience of there are 1,000 doorways into the garden, just open one.
Now, the Pentecostal approach tends to be very narrow from my experience of it. Yeah, right. Very narrow, very literal. So somehow, maybe it was the travel that opened you up, huh? To there's not just one way.
It was, well, from your own experience with that religion, how traumatic that can be. And maybe not from your experience, but it can be traumatic for some
Yeah,
of us. And
yeah,
and when I was young, my grandmother, very young, my grandmother would terrify me with stories of heaven and hell and how my parents were going to rot and burn in hell if they didn't take Jesus into their lives as their Lord and Savior.
yes.
And it was awful for a child. So I would get on that big black telephone. My mother would be somewhere else, and my other grandmothers, and I'd call my mother, that sound. And my mother had this story that she told me throughout my childhood, and I think it saved me. And I think it's what put me on this path. She said, honey, she'd say, hold your hand. That there's, you've got your pointy finger. It's going up your arm, all the way up to your arm, to your heart. Well, your grandmother, she's on this road to heaven. She'd say, tap your heart. Your father, you might have to hold the door open for him, tap your heart. But he's going to find his own road to heaven. Your grandmother, grandfather, he's on this road. I've got my own. You're going to find your own road to heaven, but they all get there. Tap your heart. And so I just came to appreciate that there were a lot of ways. And so I started meditating when I was 23, I think, daily practice. And that got me interested in non-dual philosophy, which I studied and studied and studied for the last several decades. I find it fascinating. And when I met Jivarad Slavinsky, he had ways of helping people resolve psychological pain-filled problems while giving access to non-dual states of consciousness, and then teaching them how to do that. And I found that fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. So
Because what the gift of my mother's wisdom came alive for me.
yeah, that's great. That's great. I was because I wasn't full-time living with my grandparents, did it for various lengths of time. They definitely had an impact, but there was also separation and of living at other places and living with my mother and dad. And so I had a sense of some separation, and that wasn't the whole world, the whole story.
I think that's probably true for me as well, David. That gave me, being an army brat moving around gave me perspective I wouldn't have otherwise had, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I got a big dose of that when I went to college. I went away. I wanted to get away from my home situation, and was open with my mother about that I want to go to college, but I want to go away. And she was willing to engage with that and help me, fill out applications and so on, so that I could do that. And then when I was in college, and I was Youth for Christ was there, knocking on my door and trying to get me involved with them. And but I was meeting all these other people from different religious or no religious backgrounds, and I just couldn't buy the notion that they were going to hell, that there would be a God who was less compassionate than me, because I would not send them to hell.
Yeah.
So that, for me, that kind of tore it.
Yeah, it just sort of breaks down at some point.
Yeah. But again,
and there was
about
also
me.
there was also a gift, I think, in that experience, as challenging as my grandmother could be around this, and how scary it was. There were also moments that were equally like shining. If I got into trouble as a little girl, and it wasn't often because I had a very good girl script, that didn't happen. But every once in a while I get in trouble, and she would say, she had one of those big vanity mirrors, those old fashioned big vanity mirrors. And so she'd say, you go look in front of that mirror, you go stand there and look at that mirror until you see God peeking back. When you see God peeking back, you come talk to me, then we'll have a conversation.
Huh.
So I would go stand and look in the mirror and, just look. And it's so, of course, you go into a light trance, right? A child looking in a mirror, all nice. We went into a light trance, I'm sure. And in the evening in the South, the light can turn so golden. And it was one of those evenings where the light turned golden. Everything in the room seemed alight with golden
Wow.
dust particles.
Yeah. Wow.
And then I looked in my eyes and I felt like I was the same. That was probably my first transcendent experience. I was the same as the dust, the same as the room, the same as my grandma, the same as the trouble I created. It was all just me. And I don't know how long I must have stood there, but when my grandmother finally saw me, I don't know what she must have seen when I looked up at her.
That's a
But
great
I think
story.
I saw God peeking back,
Yeah.
with that
Yeah.
delusion of separation.
Uh-huh. So that was your first kind of entry to that other world.
Yeah.
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 And then I got really interested in, when I experienced that other world is accessible to us and we can use the problems that we faced every single day to access that and become more stable in that, that's pretty alluring. It gives us the space between stimulus and response.
Do you find that some clients are uh, have a great difficulty doing that? I mean, you make it sound easy, but I could imagine that there'd be clients who are resistant, who have had no taste of that sort of thing, or else who are, you know, extremely skeptical, et cetera. How do you deal with that variety?
Yeah, so I see primarily other therapists and physicians and professors at this point.
Uh-huh.
That's my clientele at this point in my career. So there, many of them come to me and they're very much in their head to begin with. And also for context, I live in the Bible Belt. So
Okay.
what I'm
Where do you live?
talking,
I
I live
forgot.
in Maryville, Tennessee, just south of
Okay.
Knoxville. Yeah, near
Okay.
the Great Smoky Mountains.
Yeah.
So I live in the Bible Belt, and it's not uncommon for people to come to me or to my students with very traditional expectations about what therapy is and what to expect. And part of their training is learning how to navigate staying in collaboration and connecting with clients while simultaneously challenging them to let go of the narrative. And so in using the tension of the narrative to resolve the pain. And typically it only takes one or two times of people having that experience that they're like, I don't care, whatever you want to do, let's do it.
Uh,
Like they
wow.
no longer care about coming in and going over
Uh,
the same story.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's wonderful, because that going over the story can really be sort of a long-term trap.
Mm-hmm. And re-traumatizing for some.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there was recently a podcast. I think it was a This American Life podcast about trauma and how they were able to resolve it in something like 8 weeks. I got so many emails and calls from students that week just laughing, like, this is what they were describing. We could take care of in one session. It's so quick, and we just don't have to keep re-traumatizing people with long, arduous explorations of the trauma.
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of This American Life. I miss that
Mm-hmm.
one. I don't regularly hear it, but if you let me know if you can dig it up at some point,
Mm-hmm.
so I can search it out. You don't have to do it right now,
Yeah.
but that would be interesting. Um, so, what has the uh, how has the COVID affected your work? Is all of your work these days virtual?
Everything's virtual. I opened up a little bit I just have a couple of individuals that I would see in the office, and all of the training went virtual. So the surprise of that is that in the past, people have had to come to Tennessee for training. And because of COVID, we just said, well, we had to switch in the middle of a training. We were in the middle of a cohort last year. So we just went virtual immediately. And then all this year, all of our training has been virtual. And the surprise has been that it's opened it up to people in California and Vermont and Chicago and Illinois and Iowa. So that's been surprising that now people have more access to the training because they don't have to travel to be here.
Is it group training or all one-on-one?
It's all small group training.
Small group.
Mm-hmm.
What size groups?
Between 8 and 12 is what it's been.
Not so small.
Not so small, but the beauty of the training is that people have they work with each other as practice partners, and so they really develop a sense of what it's like to work with a variety of different people. So the intimacy of the group coalesces really quickly, and people are able to not only learn what they need to learn to serve their clients, but everything they're learning in these programs, we also do with ourselves. The expectation is that you will learn to do this work with yourself because you will soon be entering territory. Your clients will be entering territory that if you're not familiar with it, you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Because this non-dual space is very different for most people.
I have the impression that you also work with artists, with writer's block, things like that. Is that right, or am I making that up?
I have good intuition. I have worked with many artists in the past and writers, and right now I don't currently have anyone like that. Primarily because one of my students works more with those people. She's an artist and she works more with artists, so I refer to her for that. Yeah, because so it's great for artists. Oof.
Where do you see your work going in the future? What's your map look like?
What a sweet question, because I didn't see my work going here. This was a real surprise. I didn't anticipate that I would develop a model of care and then commit the last part of my career helping make sure that model of care has a solid footing. To make sure that there are enough people trained. So right now we have about 50 practitioners trained across the country. Where I see things going is that we'll be training more people to train others. Right now there's just one other trainer. And I'm working on a project to develop an app for helping people have in their hand a way to readily, easily serve their own state and return to a steady state of being.
Wow.
And I'm working on the book. I got to finish the book this year.
Yeah. I'll bet you there's probably a lot of opportunity to use your processes on yourself working
Absolutely.
on a book.
Absolutely. Every day. Yeah. And a research
right?
project. I've got a couple of research projects because that's important. I mean, we have to have research to document the veracity of what we're offering. So that's also in the works.
Well, has your research project started? If so, can you describe how it's set up?
Yeah, it's started. And what we're doing is we have a clinician pre and post and a client pre and post with identifying what the problem is that they worked on, what process was used to help them accept and integrate that problem so that they resolve it. How confident are they that they're able to navigate that with more ease now? And we catch that from the client point of view and the clinician point of view, and we'll be comparing all of those.
So you'll build up a record of a number of them, and so that you could look for any trends or
exactly. Our goal is to have the pilot study have at least 200 sessions that we have, and then move it forward to gather more sessions, because it's one thing to get emails and texts from clients and from clients of, from all of that saying, this is so great, this has changed my life. But it's another thing to identify what it's actually helping and what we're noticing around cognitive distortions. And so the other research project that has not yet started that I'm wanting is to be able to measure distorting thinking, to measure how quickly people can uproot distorted thinking as they use these processes.
Wow. Well, you've got a lot on your plate.
I do have a lot on my plate,
Yeah.
but I love it. I love it.
Uh,
Because
Well,
like you
is
said,
uh,
like you said, I can use these processes with myself. And so every day I can return home to this awareness of expansiveness and then just go about my work, just go about
yeah,
my day. Yeah.
yeah. So I imagine a lot of this work really has come out of your work with yourself, and also how you work with other people, right? And
Mhm.
this is becoming codified from all of that experience,
Right.
the accumulation.
Yeah. The accumulate and I stand like you, I'm sure we stand on the shoulders of giants. And I'm to the point in my career that I don't think I think I would lose respect for myself as a student if I didn't do everything I could to share what I've learned. I feel like I owe that to my teachers. And so
Yeah.
that's what I see the rest of my career looking like, is doing what I can to share it.
Okay. Is there anything more that we haven't really touched on that you would like to get out into this interview?
I think that one thing I'd like to underscore is we really can use presenting problems and challenges that our clients bring to us. We can use those for spiritual evolution. We could use those for spiritual well-being. By deactivating that tension and neutralizing that tension, it steps people into higher states. And I think that's pretty remarkable that our profession is in a place where within a single hour, we can not only help a client resolve a problem, but help them access their own inner ease and wisdom. I
Yeah,
like that.
I would say kind of a radical claim. I think many people would consider that to be a very radical claim. Ideally, over time, more and more people will begin to see that as part of the proper profession.
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand how it seems radical, but it's not. I mean, when you see it every day, and I talk to therapists every day who, like anybody else, feeling at the end of the day uplifted and not drained, because therapists around, I mean, we are getting slammed. But in the AAIT community, the therapists are talking about how at the end of the day, they feel calmer, relaxed, like they're doing the work along with their clients, not consciously, it's happening. So that's another area of research that I'm curious about. Like, what's going on
Uh-huh.
there? I don't, yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think the other thing is I would really invite people who are interested to like follow up. And there's a foundations training coming up in September. Folks can take a look at and get a taste, without too much of an investment.
Yeah. How can people get in touch with you or find out more about your work?
You can visit aait.solutions. There's a section there, Learn. You can check out the foundations training or the fellowship. Join the waiting or the mailing list, because that's where I announce trainings. If you're on Facebook, there's also a Facebook community called the AAIT community. And so that's another place folks can get connected.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they're welcome
Okay.
to email me and we can touch base from there.
Okay. Well, Melanie McGhee, it seems like I stumbled on your name there. Melanie McGhee. I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you so much. It's really been such a pleasure and truly such an honor to be with you. I'm really grateful. Thank you.